My name is Michael Levy. I'm a co-director of the PASS program. Before you watch this excerpt, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the CFE Comprehensive course. As the name implies, this course is comprehensive. It covers off all of the bases when it comes to writing a CFE case. The course consists of practice case writing, in which students have the opportunity to write simulated CFE cases, which are professionally marked and debriefed by an experienced instructor. The course also includes technique sessions in which you will learn proven techniques that will allow you to comfortably move from reaching competence up to competent, whether you're dealing with accounting, assurance, intensive number crunching, and various other assessment opportunities. The following excerpt will give you a taste for the way in which PASS effectively debriefs a case.
Hello, my name is Michael Levy. I'm a co-director of the PASS course. I'd like to welcome everybody to the take-up of KBBT. Let me begin by explaining how I plan to conduct this take-up. We're going to start by determining what needs to be done for each required, and then we'll figure out the ranking and the time allocation. We'll then take a look at integration, which is basically how the requireds are intertwined, and that will, of course, impact the sequence in which we attack the case. We'll then discuss in detail how to address each required. Given that this was a very quantitative case, I'm also going to focus on how to approach the quants adequately, because your performance on the quants are obviously going to have a big impact on your overall performance when you have a very quantitative case like this. And then finally, and most importantly, I'm going to discuss how to effectively write up some of the issues, and I'm going to focus on both quants and qualitative. And the way that I'm going to focus on the write-up is as follows. I asked one of my experienced CP markers to actually come up with a sample mock response, both at the RC, the reach and competence level, as well as the C, the competence level, in order to demonstrate what it takes to get competent rather than just getting reaching competence. So these are mock responses that this professional CP marker who has seen many, many cases has come up with. She's also marked the cases, so I'll show you how she marks them. She's also given various comments on the cases. I'll show you her marking and her comments, and hopefully that'll give you really good insight in what you need to do to ensure that you get competent rather than simply getting reaching competent. I hope you find this take-up useful. Okay, so let's get started by pulling out the requireds. In the second paragraph, you're told where you are in time. Always pay attention to where you are in time. That can have a big impact on certain requireds. Other times it doesn't. You don't know one way or the other when you first read the case. So always make a mental note of where you are in time. The first required comes up in the fourth paragraph. We're told, I'm proud my business is being very profitable. As you can see from the income statement, I would like you to assess what my business is worth so I know where I stand. So the first required is to determine what the business is worth. You then move on to the next paragraph. I'm considering a new product for my shop. I drafted my ideas and some preliminary costs. Which one of the two products would be the more profitable option? I'm interested in the profitability, not only in the first year, but also on an ongoing basis. So the second required is to determine the profitability of the two product options. We need to consider, we're told explicitly to consider the first year separately from future years. So it's going to be very important to look at the first year profitability and then look at profitability on an ongoing basis from the second year and onward. We're told at the very end of the paragraph, please also discuss any qualitative factors I need to consider. So it'll be very important to deal with both the quants as well as the qualitative. When you get to the next paragraph, we're told, based on the analysis and the information you gathered, provide me with a summary on KBBT's strengths and weaknesses, as well as the opportunities and threats from the external environment. So the next required is to perform a SWOT analysis. When we get to this paragraph, we're told, also, please address any control weaknesses in KBBT and tell me what changes are required to make my business even more successful. And then we're told I would appreciate it if your recommendation would incorporate information technology to optimize the process. So for this required, we're told explicitly to address control weaknesses. It's going to be very important to make constructive recommendations to make the business more successful. It was also very important to pay attention to the second sentence in the paragraph, where you were told specifically to incorporate IT and think of ways of automating and optimizing processes. So at the end of the day, it was important to keep IT in mind, to ask yourself, are there opportunities where we can be making better use of automation? And we'll see how the stronger student does that when I show you the sample responses later on. Moving on, in the next paragraph, the last paragraph, we're told, right now, I'm not planning to have an audit done, but I may need one in the future. I'm interested in knowing what substantive procedures can be done to the 3 revenue accounts, salary and wages, and sponsorship. So notice that you're being asked to come up with procedures, but you're being told to deal with very specific accounts. Sometimes on the multis, they will be very specific about which accounts they want you to deal with. Please only deal with the accounts they ask you to. On a comp, for those of you who are doing the assurance role, it's unlikely they would tell you specifically which areas to deal with. But on a multi, they sometimes do. So if they tell you they only want you to deal with these 3 areas, revenue, salaries, and wages, and sponsorships, make sure that you only deal with these 3 areas. Finally, it says, please assume all internal control weaknesses will have been addressed based on your recommendation. So what they're telling you here is that when you come up with the substantive procedures, assume that whatever recommendations you made in the previous required to improve systems have been made already, okay? So you're doing the substantive procedures on the assumptions that your recommendations have already been implemented. So
hi, Michael.
Yes.
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, this is my first class today. So when you say multi, does it mean it's a day 3 case or a day 2 case?
Multi means a day 3 case. Multi
Day
is
3,
just
right?
short from multi-subject question, okay?
I see. But then if the role is, my role is tax, so in that case, would my question be the same for
Okay.
day 3 also?
On day 3, everybody writes exactly the same questions. It's only on day 2 where your role, where there's a specific role. So day 2, everybody will writing, different people will be writing different roles. Day 3, which is the multis, they're the same for everybody.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So let's now move on to the Appendix 5. There's one required that's not in the main body, and it's in Appendix 5. If you take a look at the bottom of Appendix 5, I have some questions about tax. One of the students recently told me about something called exempt supplies. If my bubble tea is part of this, then perhaps we can stop charging HST. How would the CRA respond if we stop charging and remitting HST? Are exempt supplies different from taxable supplies and zero-rated supplies? Also, can you explain what an input tax credit is? Not sure how often I need to file my HST, or I'm also not sure how often I need to file my HST. So here what they're doing is they're just testing basic compliance when it comes to HST. This is a sort of required, you either know it or you don't. Good case writing skills are not going to really help you very much for this required because it's very technical. You either know it or you don't. In the final paragraph, there's a compliance issue around corporate tax. Furthermore, by when do I have to file my 020 corporate tax return and pay my taxes? Did I miss the deadline to file and pay? What would be the consequence if I did? So in required number 6, we have some basic compliance issues that we need to deal with. It's not terribly unusual to have the odd required that is in the appendices. All or most of the requireds are generally going to be in the main body of the question, but occasionally you can have a required or two in the appendices, so always be on the lookout for that. So what I've done on this page here is I've summarized all of the 6 requireds. What we're going to spend the rest of the evening doing is working our way through the requireds. The only required I'm not going to take up with you is required 6 because I can't really add very much value here. You either know it or you don't. So if you don't know this, please go over the solution very carefully because all I would be doing if I took this up is literally reading the solution to you. So if you didn't know your HST compliance or your corporate tax compliance well enough to deal with number 6, please go over the solution very carefully. What I'm going to be spending this evening on are requireds 1 through 5, where I can add a lot more value. Before we look at the individual requireds, let's take a look at the ranking, okay? We're going to assume about 20 to 25 minutes to read the case and 65 to 70 minutes to write up the case. Let's start with the first required. The first required, and again, what we're trying to do here, just to make sure that everybody understands, what we're trying to do here is we've got about 65 to 70 minutes to play with, because I'm assuming that an average student already consumed between 20 and 25 minutes reading the case and planning it. So an average student would only have 65 to 70 minutes to actually write up the case. What I'm trying to do here is allocate that 65 to 70 minutes between the various requirements. Keep in mind that at this stage of the game, most people are still reading very slowly. Their reading is nowhere near as quick as it needs to be by the time they get to the CFE. So when I say that you need 20 to 25 minutes to read the case, about a quarter of the time, I am talking about once you get to the real CFE. At this stage of the game, if it's taking you more than 20 to 25 minutes to read the case, that is not abnormal. I would not worry about that. That is very normal. Your reading speed should improve as time goes on. Let's continue. For the first required, you need to determine what the business is worth. So the only way to figure out what a business is worth is by doing a business valuation. So the required is going to be primarily quantitative. You have lots of numerical information provided over a 3-year period. So you know that the valuation will need to consider 3 years of earnings. So you've got a major quant to do here. When you have a major quant, you always need significant time. So at the end of the day, you need at least a good 15 minutes to do this required because it's primarily quantitative and quants tend to be time consuming. The second required, you're dealing with the profitability of the two products and you're doing quantitative analysis, you're also doing qualitative analysis. The quantitative element will be the more time consuming because you have a lot of quantitative information provided. You've also got two separate options to consider, so you've got quants for both. The qualitative element should be a lot quicker, although it'll be important to do it justice. You can't just leave 2 minutes for the qualitative. You do need some time for it. So the way I would have broken up my time is probably about 15 to 20 minutes for the quants, because the quants is far more time consuming. You can probably do justice to the qualitative in somewhere between about 5 and 10 minutes. For the SWOT analysis, as long as you did a good job of tracking the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats, it shouldn't take very long to deal with this required. There's really no need to spend a lot of time on any given item. And also keep in mind, competent is not the equivalent of perfect. You don't have to hit every single strength and every weakness and every opportunity and every threat in order to get competent. You have to cover off all 4 bases, but you certainly don't have to hit every last point. Plus, you don't have to say a huge amount about each point. How much you do need to say about each point, we'll talk about that when we look at the CFE markers sample response. So at the end of the day, I would have spent about 5 to 10 minutes on the SWOT analysis. When I show you what you really need to do to get competent, I think you'll agree with me, 5 to 10 minutes would have sufficed. For the control weaknesses, there are a number of controls that need to be dealt with. I would certainly want to deal with most of them. You don't need to spend a huge amount of time in any given control, but it'll still take you a good 2 to 3 minutes to deal with each control. Because keep in mind that in order to get competent, whenever you're critiquing controls, it is always absolutely essential to identify the weakness, explain why it's a weakness, and then suggest a recommendation. So you've got to explain the weakness. You've got to say what the weakness is. That's what I mean by identifying it. And you've got to explain the implication. Why is it a weakness? And only then make a recommendation. So you've got to cover up all 3 bases: identification of weakness, implication, i.e. why it's a weakness, and recommendation to rectify the weakness. You need about 10 minutes for this. Required number 5, you're only dealing with 3 areas specifically. You don't have a huge amount of information to work with for any of these areas. You'll find that in general, when assurance comes up in a multi, usually a lot less depth is required than, say, a comp. That's not at all unusual. 5 to 10 minutes, some people might even be able to deal with this in 5 minutes. Again, by the time you get to the CFE. Whenever I give you these times, keep in mind, I realize it's almost impossible for anybody to meet these kind of constraints this early on in the process. For the tax required, it's a very basic required. They're simply testing HST compliance and corporate return filing deadlines. You either know it or you don't. If you know it, you should be able to jot the points down very quickly. As long as you're concise, shouldn't take you more than about 5, 6, 7 minutes. If you don't know it, then of course, no amount of time is going to help you. Again, some of you may not know it, may not be up on this yet, but use it as a learning opportunity. When you, part of your own personal debriefing of the case should entail going over the solution. So you can learn this by going over the perfect solution, which you all have, what we call the practical solution. Okay, integration. When we did case writing techniques, I made it very clear that before you start writing, it is very important to ask yourselves how the requireds are intertwined. That's what we call integration. That impacts the sequence in which you attack the case. Now, the first area of integration was between required 1, which was the business valuation, and required 2, which was determining the profitability of the products, determining which product to choose based on quantitative and qualitative analysis. The reason that they're intertwined is a business valuation should always be based on future earnings, and future earnings would be impacted by whether I choose the straw option or the popsicle option. So at the end of the day, it would have been a good idea to do required 2 first, decide which option to choose, and then base your valuation on that. If you miss this integration, you're not alone. Even when I took up this case with a group fairly close to the CFE, a large number of people missed it. I would say the vast majority. So although integration is generally important, this is an example of a more difficult example of integration. And therefore, if you missed it here, you still could have been competent for point number 1. For point number 2, the integration was more critical. Point number 2 says required number 4, in which you were critiquing controls, and required number 5, in which you were coming up with procedures, are intertwined because the substantive procedures are, you were told, are supposed to be predicated on the assumption that whatever internal control weaknesses you identified had already been addressed. They'd already been corrected based on your recommendation. So it was vital to do the control required before the procedure required, because you need to know what your recommendations are for improvement, because they need to be taken into account when you do required number 5. So you clearly have to deal with controls, make your recommendations, and then move on to procedures. I imagine most people did that, so this should not have been an issue for very many people. Does anybody have any questions on the ranking or the integration? Any questions on the ranking or integration? Everybody's okay? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take up the requireds in the order in which a student should have attacked the requireds. So given that required number 2, determine the profitability of the 2 product options and choosing the better product, impacts required number 1, because you want to build it into your business valuation, whatever option you chose. Therefore, we'll take up required 2 before 1. So we'll look at the profitability of the 2 product options, and we'll do the qualitative analysis, come to a decision as to which product to go for, and then we'll deal with the business valuation. This concludes the planning aspect of the case, i.e. identification of requireds, ranking, time allocation, and integration. We're now going to move on in the next video to the 2 product options.
I hope you enjoyed watching this excerpt. If you'd be interested in seeing the remainder of this take-up, as well as the take-up of a number of multis and comps, as well as technique sessions, please register for this course. If you're not already on our site, you can register electronically by going to our website, passyourcpa.ca. At the top of the screen, you'll see CP module courses. Please put your cursor over that and then click on CP case writing prep courses, and that will take you to the comprehensive course where you can register electronically. If you'd like to ask any questions, either I, Michael Levy, or my partner, Ira Wallfish, would be delighted to speak with you. You can use the contact information you see on this screen. We very much look forward to seeing you in the course.